In 1997, Scott Falater was an engineer who worked for Motorola. He lived with his wife, Yarmila Falater, and their two children, son Michael, 12, and daughter Megan, 15. They were, by many accounts, living a truly happy life. According to Michael, his father was a hard-working, religious man. Scott also attended a nearby Mormon church to teach religion in the morning. There had never been infidelity, financial difficulties, or abuse in Scott and Yarmila's marriage. Their relationship was characterized by love and understanding. Scott Falater has been told many times how he murdered his wife, Yarmila Falater. He's heard the gruesome details of how he stabbed her dozens of times in the family's backyard and shoved her body into their pool from the officers who arrived on the scene, investigators, and through court proceedings, including testimony from a neighbor who says he saw him commit part of the crime. Falater was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced in 2000 to life in prison. But to this day, he maintains that he doesn't remember committing the act. His defense's argument has always been that Falater killed his wife while sleepwalking, which fueled sensational headlines at the time that he was the sleepwalking killer. All I can say is I do not know what happened. I do know for sure I never planned it. There was nothing for me to gain from it, Falater told 2020 in a new exclusive video interview from the Yuma prison complex, a rarity in the Arizona prison system. There's no one else I can place the responsibility on. It's on my shoulders. I accept that and I have to move on, he added. Falater, who has never denied killing his wife, said he's never been able to forgive himself. I doubt I ever will, he said. He went on to say that he thinks about what she had to go through that night and the pain and the terror she had to feel. I can't even fathom. We were meant for each other, Falater continued. I never doubted that and I still don't doubt that. So, I will miss her until the day I die. Falater believes he'll never be released from prison. I don't expect it, he said. I really have no plans to go anywhere but here. Friends and family members told 2020 in previous interviews that the Falaters were a devoted couple, happily married and involved in the local community of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yarmila never expressed any dissatisfaction with her marriage. Her friend Marcy Blau told 2020, I would say, come on, Yarmila, there's got to be something that drives you nuts. And she would just say, nope, no, he's just a really great guy. Scott and Yarmila Falater, who he sometimes called Yarm for short, had been high school sweethearts. They were both raised Catholic but later converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Scott Falater said his wife was a great mother, a great wife, his best friend and someone who had been with him his entire adult life. Their son, Michael Falater, has long maintained that he had a very good childhood. I had a father that worked hard and supported the family and a stay-at-home mom who was always there when I came home from school, he told 2020ths. I never saw my parents argue or fight or yell at each other. It was a very loving home. On January 16, 1997, Scott Falater said he and his wife woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like someone walking on the gravel outside of their bedroom window. Scott Falater said he got out of bed and looked around the family's Phoenix home, but didn't see anything unusual. He went back to bed, but said he got little sleep that night. The following day, Scott Falater said he worked a full day at his job as an electrical engineer for Motorola and then came home to have dinner with his wife and their two kids. After dinner, Scott Falater, who taught a daily early morning religious education class before work, said he prepared a lesson he planned to give the next day. Scott Falater said his wife had asked him to fix their pool filter. At about 9 p.m. that night, he said he went out to their pool in the backyard and tried to fix it. But because it was late and dark, he said he gave up. When he came back inside, he said his wife was asleep on the couch. So he kissed her goodnight, promised to fix the pool filter the following day, and went to bed. I was really exhausted and crashed in bed, he said. I would guess it was between 9:30 and 10 o'clock p.m. The next thing he said he remembers was standing atop the stairs in his pajamas as a police officer, with his gun drawn, yelled at him to keep his hands visible and get on the floor. The Falater's neighbor, Greg Coons, has a very different version of what happened the night of January 17, 1997. Coons' girlfriend at the time, Stephanie Ridehead, told 2020, They were getting ready for bed around 10 p.m. when Ridehead said she heard moaning or crying outside. Coons later testified at trial that he went out to investigate, during which he looked over the wall between his and the Falaters' property and saw a woman lying on the ground, moving slightly. Coons told authorities he at first thought she had passed out drunk, but then he says he saw Scott Falater drag the woman over to the pool, roll her into the water, and hold her head underwater. Ridehead told 2020 Coons ran back into his home, saying that Scott Falater was drowning his wife and called 911. When Phoenix Police Department officers Joel Tranter, Stephen Stanowicz, and Kemp Layden arrived on the scene, they found Yarmila Falater floating apparently lifeless in the pool. Stanowicz said he could tell from the amount of blood in the water that it was a bad situation. As soon as he pulled her out, Stanowicz said, "I knew that she was gone. I've never seen a shark attack in person, but to me it was reminiscent of a shark attack," Tranter added. Then, Tranter and Layden noticed Scott Falater moving around upstairs. While Stanowicz tended to Yarmila Falater, Layden said he rushed in and pointed his gun at her husband, who was coming down the stairs. Layden told him to get on the ground. "I was hopelessly confused at first," Scott Falater told 2020 in a previous interview. "I kept asking, 'What is going on?' All they would do is yell, 'Get down, shut up.'" Tranter said he asked Scott Falater if there was anyone else in the house. Scott Falater told him there were 4 people, him, his wife, and their 2 kids. "At that point, I'd already observed his wife in the swimming pool, so that surprised me." Officers recalled discovering victim, seemingly bewildered husband in 1997 murder case on January 16, 1997. Phoenix police officers responded to the Falater home after a neighbor called 911 to report seeing a man, who they believed to be Scott Falater, drowning his wife in their pool. ABCnews.com. As officers moved around the house, they found Falater's 2 kids asleep in their rooms, unharmed. Michael Falater, who was 12 years old at the time, said an officer told him his parents had a fight and that his mother was dead. "I went to bed as a 12-year-old kid with a happy life, and I woke up to a police officer telling me that my mother died," Michael Falater said. Scott Falater was led away in handcuffs and taken to the police station for questioning. At this point, he said he still didn't fully understand what had happened to his wife or how he was responsible. "It just didn't seem real," Scott Falater said in a previous 2020 interview. "I'm not sure that I was 100% coherent while I was sitting in the police car. I'm not sure that even until I got to the police station that I was 100% convinced that Yarm was dead." Phoenix homicide detective John Norman interrogated Scott Falater when he came in, peppering him with questions about what happened. But Scott Falater said he couldn't remember harming his wife. When Norman pointed out that he had blood on his neck, Scott Falater said he didn't know it was there. Norman also told him that his wife had been stabbed and that a neighbor had seen him drown her in the pool, which seemed to stun Falater. But Norman said he wasn't having it. "I'm not going to buy his story when I got an eyewitness watching him drown her. No. His story was hogwash," Norman told 2020. "The only thing I believed about his story was that his name was Scott Falater." Scott Falater was arrested and charged with first-degree murder for his wife's death. 2 years later, in 1999, 2020 interviewed him in jail while he awaited trial. In that interview, Scott Falater maintained that he loved his wife and that he was still struggling with what happened. "I accept the fact that the neighbors saw me do the physical act. Would I have consciously and intentionally killed her? Absolutely not," he told 2020 at the time. 2020 was also there during one of Falater's jailhouse visits with his 2 children. "I recall him telling me that he loved me and that he hoped one day that he could come back and be my father," Michael Falater said. Looking back on that moment now as an adult, she disturbed him. He could have seen her as a threat, prompting him to unknowingly attack her. The defense called 2 of Scott Falater's cellmates to the stand, who testified they had watched him sleepwalking in their cell. Both of Scott and Yarmila Falater's kids also testified and described a happy childhood with their loving parents. Meanwhile, Prosecutor Martinez had a detective who had searched the Falater home on the stand describing the moment he found bloody clothes in a food container and a bloody hunting-style knife in a spare tire storage area in the back of Scott Falater's car. The police said this was evidence that showed Scott Falater hid his clothes and the murder weapon, had tried to wash off the blood on him, and had changed clothes. On cross-examination, Broughton acknowledged it was unusual for a sleepwalker to carry out so many actions during a single episode. The prosecution's own sleep expert testified that he believed Scott Falater had to have been awake when he killed his wife because he claimed there had been too many complex actions for someone in a sleepwalking state to do. Finally, Scott Falater himself took the stand. He testified that he had no memory of what happened. On cross-examination, the prosecutor asked him about a comment he made during a psychologist's evaluation when he was in jail awaiting trial, in which he used the phrase unforgivable sin. I felt that perhaps I had committed the unforgivable sin by killing Yarm, and that, obviously, was bothering me a lot, Scott Falater told 2020 in a 1999 post-trial interview. The jury found Scott Falater guilty of first-degree murder. In a 1999 post-trial interview with 2020, some of the jurors said they could believe Falater stabbed his wife while sleepwalking, but not that he went back to drown her. One juror also noted the murder weapon was a hunting knife Falater said he must have been using in his sleepwalking state to try to fix the pool pump, but that kind of knife, the juror said, is something that is not used for any other purpose except for killing. Scott Falater faced a possible death penalty at sentencing the following year, but after listening to a series of character witnesses who testified on his behalf, including his 2 children who pleaded for his life, the judge decided on a life sentence without parole. Today, Falater remains in prison, where he expects to live out the rest of his days. He said he practices meditation, gets plenty of sleep, and that he's gotten letters from other sleepwalkers. He said he encourages anyone with a sleep disorder to get treatment. The Falater children supported their father throughout his trial and sentencing. Scott Falater says he has been in touch with both of them over the years. I couldn't be prouder of both of them, Scott Falater told 2020 in a recent interview. I will go to my grave extremely proud of both of them. Michael Falater said he's visited his father in prison, though during the COVID-19 pandemic, they've been limited to video calls. Scott Falater is still my dad, and I hope to always have that relationship with him, whether he's in prison or he's out, he said. Although Scott Falater said he'll never be able to forgive himself, he believes his wife would have been willing to be more understanding and forgiving of me than I feel right now about myself. Falater says he hopes he can be reunited with his wife in heaven. She knows more than I do about what happened that night, and she will actually know how I've conducted myself since then, he said. I want to be sure that I'm still worthy of her by how I carry myself now.